and the reconciliation of that was I had to leave, rejected by the deep state, and so I started an investment bank in Washington called Hamilton Securities Group, and we had a very successful run applying new technology to all sorts of financial market transactions. But then again, I ran right smack into the mortgage fraud. Transparency is not what a lot of players in the financial markets really want. And so I ended up litigating with the Department of Justice for 11 years. And I started Solari Investment Advisory Services, which we've now turned into a screen company. So Solari Investment Screens, we do equity screens. So essentially it was, I would say, the primary beneficiary of the process of mortgage fraud was what I call the black budget. So, I was told at one point that Oliver North had said that HUD was the candy store of covert revenues. And that's what I saw. There was a lot of money funding covert operations and military and intelligence programs. And it was a way of clawing money out of the federal government by secret means. If you look at what's happened since the Patriot Act was passed in 9/11, there's been a series of both laws and administrative policies promulgated that allow essentially the powers that be to take, an infinite amount of secret government money without having to go, to the bother of all the mortgage fraud. I will say this, when we first I created a company, Hamilton Securities, after I left, and then we got hired back on competitive bid to be the lead financial advisor. And at the time, the recovery rate on defaulted mortgages on average in the country was 70%. At HUD, it was 35%. And we were able to successfully get it back up to 70%. And what we discovered was there were many big investors in the country who were quite irritated because the difference between that 70% and 30%, they were basically skimming out of the back end.
Yeah. The Pentagon announced last week that it failed its 7th consecutive audit. That's
not correct.
That's not correct?
That's not correct. They have failed since 1996. I was part of a group of people in the Bush administration that laws passed that required the federal governments and its agencies to publish audited financial statements. And so in 1996, they started to fail to produce audits, and it's been every year since then. So I would say, so let me just say that the Pentagon has not failed to do an audit. The Pentagon and the Treasury and the New York Fed in combination together have operated outside of the laws required for financial management. And when I say operated outside the laws, I mean operated way outside the law. I call it a financial coup. So in 1998, a process began where the government started through the failure to produce an audit to describe undocumentable adjustments. So an undocumentable adjustment is the adjustment you need to make to bring the books back into balance. So it's transactions that you don't have documentation for, or you can't explain what really happened. So between fiscal 1998 and 2015, the federal government has undocumentable adjustments of $21 trillion. And those are at two departments, the Pentagon, and so Department of Defense and Department of Housing and Urban Development. If you go to missingmoney.solari.com, we have a website just dedicated to providing extensive documentation on the missing money. And the reason we don't know what the undocumentable adjustments are after 2015 is a policy was promulgated in the first Trump administration in 2018. It's an administrative policy, and it was adopted by both the House, the Senate, both Republican and Democrat, and the White House together, administrative policy. It's called Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board Statement 56. I call it FASB 56 for short. And what it said was that by administrative policy, the federal government can keep secret books. And that applies to the covered agencies, 24 covered agencies, as well as approximately 150 other related entities or commissions or sort of governmental corporations. And if you take into account the national security laws and the classification laws, it also extends to the big defense contractors and banks that do a lot and increasingly run, and big tech firms that run the government operations. And so what that means is the entire treasury market and big pieces of the financial market have gone secret. That policy was promulgated during the Kavanaugh hearings. So while everybody was paying attention to the sex life of one of the Supreme Court nominees, basically the federal government, Republicans and Democrats, the uniparty combined, got together and agreed to keep secret books. Now, what does that mean? That means that we are looking at a coup d'etat. We are talking about not only running the federal government way outside the law, but we are talking about taking trillions of dollars and shifting it out of the government into someplace else. And of course, the question is, where is that?
And is that then how they fund the activities of voter fraud, special ops, black ops, sex trafficking, whatever they want?
It's quite extensive. So, and obviously we don't have hard evidence of where that money went, but what I will tell you is that's enough money to start a new civilization. I mean, you're basically talking about enough money to fund a whole new system of running the planet. So, for example, just to pick numbers out of the air, if I put $21 trillion in a brokerage account and I earn 10% interest on it, that's $2.1 trillion a year. That's enough to run a global government. Wow. It's also enough to end poverty and a few other things.
And we see this whole system today, and more people are now aware of this global governance. Do you think that's what this is really about?
So here's what I think this is really about. In 1995, we had a budget deal that cratered, and we got a government shutdown for 3 weeks. I brought forward the work I had done in Hamilton Securities Group about how we could completely re-engineer the federal budget, bring down the deficit, and just build explosive new wealth thanks to technology. And it was a way of sort of how you take America, 3,100 counties, and re-engineer government investment to build explosive wealth one county at a time, bottom up. Anyway, so I took the plans and I presented it to a wonderful group of pension fund leaders, and the president of the largest pension fund in the country, Cal Pers, looked at me and he said, "You don't understand, it's too late. They've given up on the country. They're moving all the money out starting in the fall." And that fall was the beginning. It was October 1997, which was the beginning of the 1998 fiscal year, when the trillions of dollars started to go missing. So, anyway, so I think what happened was a decision was made that the current balance of power between the central bankers who run monetary policy and the people's representatives that run fiscal policy had reached a breaking point, that you couldn't depend on a democratic process in a republic to produce a financially responsible result, that there was no constituency for financial responsibility. As a result, the central bankers decided to basically assert control over fiscal policy and move us into a whole different form of government using digital technology to assert control. And that's what they've been doing ever since. And you see more and more of the leadership of the financial system working through the central banks and the intelligence agencies, who are often their sort of implementation arm, to take more and more control over the fiscal side of the house. And that includes election fraud, but includes many other things. And I think part of engineering this coup is moving all the money and resources and assets into separate legal entities. And that's why I call it a breakaway civilization. And it's a little bit.
You also call it a great poisoning for the middle class, the great poison.
Well, what also started to happen, here's what started to happen. When you look at the financial coup, is you're basically taking all the retirement savings and moving it out of the system before people retire. So the baby boomers had spent decades building up extraordinary resources in the pension funds and extraordinary resources in Social Security and military retirements and other retirement accounts. So we have enormous promises to the baby boomers as they retire. And if you're not going to come up with, if that failed, the other way you could manage that is to either extend the retirement age or bring down life expectancy. And in fact, a month after, it was the month after that deal busted, we saw OxyContin approved at the FDA and a dramatic increase in the steps you needed to do predatory lending in the poor neighborhoods. And we literally, both the food, the water, the spraying, the pill mills, and all sorts of pharmaceutical and healthcare policies all contributed to what I call the Great Poisoning, which is a general increase in toxicity in people's bodies and a fall in the strength of their immune system. And the result is literally an epidemic, not of a particular disease, but of people dying younger and younger and younger and being disabled in a way that has dramatically lowered life expectancy, particularly with the contribution from COVID. If you look at the 3 years of that operation, it is dramatically causing the death rate to rise. And if you look at a chart of the 20 industrialized nations and their life expectancy rising, throughout the last century, you hit that 95, 96 period when the financial coup starts, and you start to see the U.S. diverge from the other 19, and slowly and steadily life expectancy falls until the pandemic, and then it falls off the cliff. And that's certainly what you see now. We've been doing a financial freedom tour in the United States, and I've been in 26 states in the last 2.5 months and more when I did the spring tour, and that's what you see everywhere. You really see a dramatic reduction in the quality of health and in life expectancy.
And that's consistent with all the medical doctors, Dr. James Thorpe, Dr. Peter McCullough, just all these different people we've been interviewing talking about how this shot attacks your immune system, brings down your immune system. Now we, of course, have turbo cancers with young people. We have brain clots that have increased 112,000% since the COVID shot was rolled out. We have infertility rates off the chart. So is it because they want to depopulate? For many reasons, I know they think that humans are a blight, but is it also because the retirement accounts have been stolen?
Well, here's what they say. I think one of the reasons they're bringing life expectancy down is so that they can rebalance the retirement savings. So
okay, that's what I was getting to. Yes.
If you look at Social Security, both the combination of immigration and this, what I call the Great Poisoning, I think has contributed to really, slowly and steadily shoring Social Security up and sort of delaying the day of reckoning on Social Security. So I will say this, as a financial matter, the Great Poisoning and immigration in combination is working. The other thing they're using to make this work is inflation. So they're keeping their commitments to make the payment. At the same time, the purchasing power of that payment is dramatically less. So part of the adjustment comes from life expectancy. Some of it comes from inflation, and COVID was very helpful in contributing to that inflation. It essentially, the central bankers agreed in August of 2019 on the going direct reset. So the reset is sort of your period of consolidation that will to sort of lock in the financial coup and make it go. But the beginning of the reset, they injected $5 trillion, which is what is causing the inflation now. And that $5 trillion was very targeted in how it went into the economy. It didn't just go into the reserve track, it went to it went going direct. But they delayed the hit of the inflation by shutting down Main Street. Shutting down Main Street was a way of generating huge deflation in the sectors that you're trying to consolidate. So one statistic I saw at the end of COVID was 35% of the small businesses in America were essentially wiped out, shut down. And that causes an offsetting deflation that delayed the natural price inflation that was going to come from the 5 trillion of monetary inflation.
So,
So, and of course, one of the things we're watching now is as you get a very inflationary monetary policy, what other shocks will be engineered, including war, to create the offsetting deflation.
well, there you go. You led me right into that, World War III. That this is the most dangerous time we've ever been in U.S. history for nuclear war. This is a greater risk than in '62 with Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The American people are oblivious, by and large, how dangerous it is now. While Sweden, Germany, and other countries are preparing their population for World War, NATO's kicking it up, sending long-range missiles by the U.S. into Russia. Now we've got the Storm Shadow missiles from the UK. Now we have NATO talking about preemptive strikes on Russia. World War III, Catherine, it seems as though they really want to make sure this thing kicks off before Donald Trump comes into office. How does this fit with disrupting Trump and or also the financial crisis they're trying to create here? Because wasn't it Klaus Schwab that said by 2030 you'll own nothing and be happy?
Right. So clearly we know that's the vision of some of the factions. I mean, basically, they want to end property rights and centralize complete control, both of not only control and ownership of assets, but basically control of our financial transactions such that, basically we're slaves. They have spatial control. If they don't want you leaving your house, your money won't work outside their house. If they don't want you driving your electric car, they turn off your electricity, and they can do it all, with AI and software by central rules. So what they're envisioning is complete control. The first step to complete control is a digital ID system.
100% agree.
Okay. So the notion that we need a digital ID to stop election fraud or immigration is just not true, and it needs to be stopped. And we know there's a push with the real ID at the state level to get a national ID.
Yes.
So this is issue number one. Bring transparency. Don't let the digital ID happen. The second thing we need is we never want an all digital monetary system, because that combined with the digital ID gives central control. That creates central control. Boom, you're in the digital concentration camp. So the president has come out and said he's against CBDC, but he needs to be against any private version thereof. Because you can do an all digital monetary system with credit cards. You can do it with bank accounts. So we have a big orange hat that says make cash great again. But we need to make every effort we can to preserve cash and keep the system from going all digital as a monetary system. Okay, the last thing we need to do is to not. So here's the problem with what Musk is up to with Doge. The question is, we've had a balance of power where the central bankers run monetary policy, but the people's representatives run fiscal policy. And the more we put private government contractors, whether they're defense contractors or big tech and big banks in, the less control the people's representatives have. The civil service is the one group that obeys the laws. They are given written instructions to do what they do. If you don't like what they're doing, change the written instructions. If you replace them with all big tech companies, the central bankers will be much closer to controlling fiscal policy as well as monetary policy. And then it's checkmate, game over. So the notion that we're going to kick out inefficient civil servants and replace them with big tech firms, and that's going to solve anything, it's going to make matters much worse. Just like it's made matters much worse for 20 or 30 years. If you want to change the civil service, reform them, re-engineer them, and give them different written instructions. If you don't like what they're doing, it's because somebody gave them written instructions that you don't like. Change the instructions. But don't take away Congress's arm. Don't take control from Congress and give it to the banker, which is what I see and hear Musk doing, including big support for a carbon credit scheme, which I think is totally unnecessary. The last thing you want to watch is we have people going into the cabinet who are extremely wealthy and very good at making money, and we have a federal government with enormous amounts of assets that can be plundered. Now, because you were part of the Omni War symposium, I think we're in World War III now. I don't think World War III is necessarily going to look like a conventional war. World War III is basically an effort to centrally assert control over every one of 8 billion people on the planet. And I think the COVID injections were part of getting things into people's body. So they don't just want to depopulate, but those of us who are left standing, they want us to, download an operating system that can interact with their computers, literally. So we're in Omni War right now, and Omni War is really it's a perfect word for the weaponization of everything. What I've watched for my entire lifetime is the global economy being plundered, and being plundered in a way that makes some people wealthier at the top, but shrinks the pie. And as the population grows, and there's more and more need for resources, of course, the plundering gets more, it's reached a state that's manic. And we have two choices. We can either dramatically depopulate, or we can change the model. And, my vote would be to change the model. We do need a reset. The current system does not work, and it needs to change. And new technology gives you the opportunity to build explosive new wealth, but it also gives you very powerful technology that has a lot of risk. And, and if you're running things, you don't want to let that technology out of the closet because you don't want to see it weaponized, but you can let it out of the closet if you have complete control. So I think we need an honest discussion of how are we going to do a reset that is a human reset as opposed to one that is, what we're looking at is quite anti-human and tyrannical. And so clearly the global population is rejecting it, but the more important thing we need is a conversation on how we're going to have a building wealth reset, and how are we going to build real financial responsibility on a bottom-up basis, which I know can be done. I don't think it needs complete control we don't need climate change scams and frauds. There's a new fraud that's about the worst thing I have ever seen in my life, called the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yep.
It is the worst Ponzi scheme I have ever seen in my life. And we're watching an incredible AstroTurf effort to get state legislators and the federal government to consider it. And it's complete, it is the ultimate theft. It's going to be, if it really happened, it's going to be worse than the 21 trillion stolen. They're going to steal everything left.
How should the average person watching tonight protect themselves? What does Catherine Austin Fitts think people should be doing? Gold, silver, land, rental property?
Here's the first thing. We absolutely agree about real assets, but let me tell you the most important thing you're going to need. The currency of the future will be relationships of trust. I trust the People Bank. It's the only bank I trust now. So
explain to me what you mean. What do you mean by the People Bank? Explain that.
So who in your life, when the you know what hits the you know what, who in your life is going to be there for you? Who can you count on? Who's going to be there for you if you get in trouble, if you're old and sick? Who's going to be there? And your primary asset in your life is your family. It's your child. It's your grandchild. It's their future. That's what makes you safe. It's that relationship which is your primary asset, not the money sitting. So I used to have this fight with clients who wouldn't buy really fine local food, healthy food, organic food. They said they couldn't afford it because they didn't have that magic 25 million. I said, don't be ridiculous. You'll never be able to retire because you're going to die from poisoning before you get there. So anyway, so the first thing you need to look at is you don't need an investment strategy. You need a war strategy because you're in a war. And Omni War is real. And so the first thing you need to know is, who can you count on? Who's your tribe? I think it's very important to understand who your tribe is. For example, where are you going to get food? You can't trust the food at the grocery store anymore. If you need to finance local farmers, I'll never forget, there was a group of Swiss money managers who got together and decided they'd had it with the food system, and they bought a farm. They imported a family from Eastern Europe. and that family was in charge of growing or accessing all their food. That was an investment. And it wasn't the typical financial investment, but it was an investment in making sure they had, whether it's healthcare, whether it's, we're seeing people investing in building parallel health systems all over the country because they know they need doctors and nurses they can trust, but they can't get them unless they build that parallel system.
Wow.
So anyway, so first, first investment number one is the people bank. After the people bank, absolutely hard assets. So, and one of my favorite lines is from Franklin Sanders, who's a pastor and gold dealer in Tennessee. He says, what I try and impress upon people is that the morning after the end of the world, somebody's going to wake up hungry and somebody's going to make money cooking breakfast for them. So we don't want tyranny. We want to be part of a human civilization. We want to build civilization. How do we take new technology and apply it to making us more productive, more healthy? How do we build new health systems that really work? How do we build enterprises that really decentralize money and economics and pull it back to Main Street? How do we create enormous opportunities for our kids to rebuild Main Street? The way you build a great civilization is one child at a time. That's how you build a great civilization. And it starts with, physical strength and health, but the next step is culture. So John Edward Hurley was one of my favorite people when I was in Washington, used to say, culture is the integration of the divine in everyday life. Now, it can also be the integration of the demonic in everyday life.
Right.
But if you want a great civilization, you gotta build that. You've got to integrate that divine intelligence into everyday life. And then
Catherine Austin Fitts, what an amazing person. The things we could talk about for hours, and I hope we get to do that. We'd love to bring you in and have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
You too. Look forward to having you back.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You too, Catherine.
Catherine Austin Fitts, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you being here.
Maria, it's always great to talk to you. I always learn so much whenever we chew through things.
Well, that's what we're going to aim to do here today. Obviously, a lot of people have a lot of concerns. Let's start with your initial assessments of how things have been going over the past few weeks.
Okay, so I want to start by just looking at what any new administration coming in would face, because we're in for big change, and that has nothing to do with the incoming administration. That has to do with the environment they face.
Right.
So it's really helpful. I always like to say, what would I do if I were in their shoes? And you can't understand that unless you understand, what it is they are facing. So the first thing they're facing is there was a move by the United States at the end of Soviet Union to become a unipolar empire. And that effort has failed. So we were a unipolar empire for a period of time. And now the U.S., with the loss of the war in the Ukraine and sort of events in the Middle East, is having to pull back and say, okay, we're one of several great powers. So we assert that we're the greatest power, but it's a multipolar world. So you see the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, saying, it's a multipolar world, and we have to adjust to a multipolar world. Secretary of Defense is making the same noises, and of course what you're seeing with discussions around the Ukraine reflect that.
Right.
So essentially the neocon strategy lost big in the Ukraine. And the incoming administration, whoever they are, whatever their philosophy is, has to deal with that. It is what it is. The second thing that's happened is, if you go back, there's a very interesting Australian think tank that tracks the top technologies and who's in the lead on the top technologies globally. They tracked 64 technologies at the end of 2007. The U.S. led in, I think, 60 of the 64. And today, the U.S. leads in 7, and China leads in 57, and is rapidly increasing their leadership in the other. And so the new administration is looking at that, particularly AI, of all the technologies. They're most concerned with its artificial intelligence, and they're saying, oh my God, China's replacing us.
Right.
Now, as that happens, and this is not the first administration to face that issue, they are starting to decouple from China. And I can't emphasize enough about how big this decoupling is in terms of what it will do globally. Because we're talking about deglobalization. And if you look at sort of the average standard of living that the average person has enjoyed for the last, since globalization and the growth of manufacturing in China started, we've had what one author, Peter Zeihan, calls more, 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 more. And deglobalization means less, 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 whether you like it or not. And so we're talking about taking all the trade that has been happening globally and completely reshuffling the economics of that trade. So what it means is things that weren't efficient for me to do locally, now suddenly it's more attractive to do locally because of the tariffs or trade, the transportation expenses. So the fundamental economics of what you do locally and what you do globally is just dramatically changing. If you look at how all the nations line up, we could see resources sucked up by the AI leaders, China and the United States, and a lot of other countries sort of thrown overboard.
Right. Yeah. And that was my concern about this. What we saw was a controlled demolition of every single country when it comes to energy, right? Because of climate policies. And so now people's energy bills are through the roof. They're being told in Australia, they're remotely cutting off the power. They've done it again recently to people. And now we're being, the incoming opposition leader, the incoming prime minister, a lot of people are expecting that he's probably going to get elected. But he's talking about nuclear energy now and data centers and all of this. So basically, there is an option for the people to benefit from this new energy strategy, or it's all going to be sucked up by the AI overlords.
If you institute the control grid, which is what most of the data centers usually are, you are going to create an energy rapacious waste of resources that will suck up all the energy and more. So it won't go to the people, it will go to the grid that you're using to control the people. And if anything, it runs the risk of sort of, along with the AI, of pushing for depopulation, as we saw during the COVID pandemic. So anyway, but it's important to understand that every country is dealing with embedded inflation, not from the collapse of the dollar, but from the collapse of trade. So, and part of the problem with a multipolar world is cooperation and trust brings trade, which brings prosperity. The more people distrust and the more agreements break down. And that was the global trade system. The United States everybody was dependent on the United States to run the Bretton Woods trade system and to keep an open trade model going. And as long as the U.S. was willing to play the global cop, and it worked fairly well, the U.S. allies were protected. Now the U.S. allies are waking up and saying, wait a minute, we can't depend on that open trade model. What's next? And that's why there's so much concern about what a new administration might do. No one is quite clear.
Right.
But the reality is, the U.S. is not running the dollar system, but it's part of running the dollar system. And it has been running the trade system. And if you look at the economics of doing that in the future, it has to change what it's doing and how it's doing. And part of what you're watching, the new administration, is one, we're gonna shift to a multipolar model. That's number one. Number two, we're going to make sure the nationalists are in charge, not the globalists. So it's a different syndicate within the uniparty. You still got the deep state and the uniparty. It's just a different syndicate. Okay, so we're gonna shift to a national model, just like Putin has, and just like Xi Jinping. If you go to the G20 meeting, Xi Jinping and Putin and Modi and the whole bunch committed loyalty to the BIS control model. But they don't want globalists in charge of their country. They want a national heir in charge of their country. And essentially what they're saying is, given new technology, we don't need the old control tools like USAID. We need new control tools. And so what they're doing is they are shifting from the old control tools, and they're building new control tools. And they're getting popular support for doing that by saying, oh, all that old stuff was corrupt. Well, the new stuff is even more corrupt. And I'll give you the perfect example. The greatest corruption in the United States, or at the very heart of the corruption since fiscal 1998, is the U.S. refusing to obey its financial management laws. And it got so bad, Maria, that in the last Trump administration, Trump promulgated a policy called FASB 56, which said, okay, we can keep secret books. And so since the last Trump administration, the books of the United States have been secret. Clearly the uniparty, that's a uniparty policy. Biden didn't change it back, and Trump hasn't said a word, okay? Not a word about the secret books. So Trump is talking about radical transparency. If you have FASB 56 in place, you don't believe in any transparency. You are total secret. Okay, now, before they instituted FASB 56, we know that 21 trillion was missing. Now, if you listen to the DOGE initiative, they're talking about cutting the annual expenditures $2 trillion.
Yes.
They're not talking about where is the 21 trillion and how do you get it back.
Right.
So they're not mentioning, so if you want to return the United States to a fiscally sound basis, the first thing you do is you'd go over and you'd audit DOD, Treasury, the Treasury accounts and the DOD and HUD accounts at New York Fed and HUD. You do those 4 or 5 audits and you'd figure out who got the 21 trillion and you get it back. You'd put it on the balance sheet. Nobody has said Bo Peep or is mentioning any of that. And they're certainly not canceling FASB 56, which is to say they're simply looking to replace the old corruption with new corruption, or I shouldn't say corruption, new control tools. Now, if you look at the pieces I've written, what I'm trying to focus people on is all the things they're putting into place, the nuts and bolts of building the control grid. So if you look at digital technology, we've been building more and more control of the financial system for years, and CBDC and the digital ID is sort of the last piece to be put in place. The most important thing you need is a digital ID.
Right.
That's the next big step. And if you look at what they're doing in both digital ID, but the other pieces you need to support a digital ID and surveillance network, and like the data centers that they're proposing with Stargate, same as you're getting in Australia, if you break it down and look exactly what they're building all the different pieces. One of the most important pieces after the digital ID you need to build to institute the control grid is you need to put the central bankers in charge of fiscal policy. And what you're watching with DOGE is an effort to basically cut Congress out. And that, it's not just DOGE. This has been building for a long time, because remember what you've done is you've tried to so scare the people in Congress with death threats, with physical harassment, with other forms of harassment, with control files, with bribes, all the different tools. You're trying to put Congress in the corner so that ultimately the central bankers can run fiscal policy as well. And what does that mean? It means taxation without representation, and means the people's representatives have no say in how the money, gets allocated or spent. So part of what you're watching is sort of taking a saw to the control of Congress of the expenditures under the Constitution, and you're basically trying to saw your way through it. And if they're successful, you're basically, along with refusal to obey the financial management laws, you're basically destroying the Constitution. And that is the thing we cannot permit. You just cannot permit that to happen. So part of what you're watching is, we have to have radical change. It's not any new coming in administration's fault that we have to have radical change. The question is that change going to be to newer, more centralized control, or is it going to be returning to constitutional government? Everything I see, with rare exception, and there are some exceptions and they're good ones, this team is building the central control grid. I can do the digital control grid with crypto, or I can do it with CBDCs. But what I need to do it is I need a digital ID. I need to destroy Congress's control of the fiscal policies of the country, and I need an all digital monetary system. Those are the three things I must have. And that's what I explain in the Trump administration article. Now, from what I see, they are moving at lightning speed to achieve all three. They prefer to do the all digital monetary system with crypto instead of CBDCs. Crypto gives them far more secrecy and far more private power. If you think CBDC is bad, a private crypto, all digital monetary system is even worse. So,
well, yes, you and I spoke about this previously. They don't even need a CBDC to achieve the things that they want to right now, because banks are already tracking your carbon spending, for example, or things of this nature.
Right.
They spoke about how they can just program money.
They can do it with Visa.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
And Musk is partnering with Visa, right?
Right.
So, a few points here. You're absolutely right. The system needs a complete overhaul. It is, and every single country has the same problem. The government's too big. It's a police state or a nanny state. The US isn't quite as bad as the other Western countries, but just as Australia as an example, 1 in 5 employees in the country are government employees, federal employees. That is absolutely wild. That is, it is unbelievable expenditure. No wonder the tax rates are so high in that country. And so you certainly don't need this many employees. And I was talking to Mike Adams, who is very, very positive about the future of AI, because he believes in decentralized AI, right? So he's talking about, if everything's open source, if everything's completely transparent and people have access to the open source information so that they can personally track their government, then the system works well. My concern is
that is not what's happening.
Well, that's exactly right. It's not. Right. It's not. And so Elon Musk he wants to buy OpenAI because he wants it to be open source. This is his biggest gripe with OpenAI. Well, let me remind everyone that when Elon Musk purchased X, he said he would make all of the algorithms and everything transparent. Time's ticking, and that still hasn't happened. In fact, we've seen worse censorship than under Jack Dorsey.
So I would like to point out that if you want to monetize on X, you have to send your biometric information into Israel.
Correct. By a company that used to be Unit 8200. So,
right.
So, right. Yes, that is very concerning. And it's not only that. If you want to activate subscribers and, if you happen to get hacked and you want to get back into your account, you have to do the same thing. And it's interesting, Catherine, because people may say, oh, what's the big deal? Well, would you send your biometrics to the CIA or to, the KGB? I mean, would you be comfortable with that? No, you wouldn't. Or to people associated with it, right? And, the other issue is that Authentics, which is the company that you're talking about, had a massive data breach. When X previously announced that they were going to be doing this, there was a huge backlash and a huge data breach by Authentics. And so X pulled out of that and then they snuck it back in. And so we're talking about a man, Elon Musk, who deals with companies with no problem, it seems, that are involved in massive data breaches, who have links to the intelligence community in a foreign nation.
I mean, I don't know why to me, Musk has always just been a front for an operation in the deep state. So somebody the other day asked me, if I wanted to get hooked up with Musk, if I wanted them to introduce me. So I started to email back, and I decided, no, I'm not going to. I said, which of the 30 Elon Musk are you planning on introducing me to? The 6 that run 6 companies, the 3 to 5 who do 24/7 posting on X 7 days a week, or the 1 to 3 that are the gaming champion, or the one that's working full time for Doge, but somebody seems to be working on the weekends, so maybe that's 1 to 3. And then if you look at there's one for the offer to open AI because that's a full-time job.
Right.
And then, I kept going down and down and down, and I got up to 30 Elon Musks. So, at some point you have to ask. I'll never forget somebody sent me a picture of Elon Musk at the World Cup in Dubai, and he's leaning over to shake somebody's hand, and the T-shirt comes down, and you can see where the mask ends.
I have seen recent videos where people are, it does look very, very suspicious indeed. And so, just judging
but here's
by...
the thing. There is an operation somewhere, and I don't know if it's at Unit 8200 or if it's at the NSA or the CIA or some private contractor.
Combination of all, yeah.
Right. There's a command center called Elon Musk. And the question is Elon Musk still a person or, and how many people are out there pretending to be Elon Musk? Because we're up to 30 people now.
Yes,
right?
just a common sense approach. This man is presented as some sort of a genius. You hear him talk, he's anything but that. And then people make excuses that it's because he's autistic. And yet, we're acknowledging, first of all, we're acknowledging this man doesn't sound like a genius and he actually struggles to speak because he's autistic. We're going to trust him with absolutely every aspect of how the government runs. And on top of that, he has time, like you said, to tweet all day and run all these companies and do all these sorts of things and, launch rocket shows. So it's really, really bizarre to me, Catherine, how this mania has gripped people and they aren't able to look at things objectively anymore. And it's like all the lessons that people learned during COVID just got thrown out of the window. And there is also, and this is why I'm struggling to trust this process that's going on right now, because I see a lot of the benefits. I really do. And I don't want to be dismissive of that. It is wonderful to uncover trillions of dollars in waste. It's wonderful to uncover corrupt departments.
Not if you're going to waste more on the other side. If you look at what they're planning on Stargate, they announced on the second day a $500 trillion waste.
Well, that was private companies investing in the US, though.
No. They said it was private, but let me tell you where that $500 trillion is going to come from.
Okay.
All those companies are government contractors. All those companies get massive subsidies and purchases from the government one way or another. And when you pull it all through, what you're going to find is most of that money is going to come from the taxpayer.
Right.
I mean, Amazon is a CIA contractor. They run the cloud at the CIA, the 17 intelligence agencies, and a piece of DOD. Oracle runs a piece of the DOD cloud. I mean, all these companies are creatures of both the intelligence agencies and the military. And they always have fun from the beginning. And if you look at the people who, quote unquote, run the companies, I mean, this used to happen to me in Washington all the time. I would deal with a company and the CEO would make a decision and say, okay, we're going to go to the right. And then his investors would call him up and say, no, we don't like that. We want you to go to the left. At which point the guys at the CIA and the Department of Justice would call up and say, no. You're a government proprietary. You're going to go through the middle, right? And what you kept discovering was the government ran the company.
Right.
So this corruption is the old tools. The way you ran the empire is you hired everybody. You put everybody on the payroll. So you would see enormous waste in the Pentagon military contracts because they wanted to make sure they put every great engineer on the payroll. They didn't want the engineer. It's what Lyndon Johnson once said about Bobby Kennedy. He said, I'd rather have him in the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. So you try and make sure you get all the top engineers on your payroll because they can't, leave and go do community venture funds or all the kind of things they would do to sort of build a decentralized economy, right? So you're just canceling the old corruption and you're moving the money to the new corruption, which is going to be, Palantir and drones and lavender going over your house, controlling you with $500 trillion or $500 billion worth of data centers, right?
Yes, well, this is the thing. So I recently interviewed a gentleman called Andrew Arnold, and he's doing some incredible work. And if people haven't seen it, go back and watch that interview. So he's using AI to map out, I'm just going to bring it up on screen for everyone, to map out essentially what people can't see about what Doge and what's been uncovered about USAID and all of this sort of stuff. And so through this particular map that I've got on screen, he's actually found all of the original people that were involved in Doge and all of the big tech guys who conceived the idea of Doge long before it was known to the public. Right. And so this is not a brand new idea. People are, I don't know, believing that this just happened. Elon Musk just went in there and did this magically. This has been a long time coming. You've got Mark Andreessen and other big tech guys, a lot of biotech investors, a lot of Silicon Valley guys that were originally interested in Doge before we even knew about what it was. So this is, I think you're right. And the point is that the people don't trust these people. What do they actually want? Well, let's just have a look at statements that Palantir have made in the past. The CEO, Alex Karp, says he dreams of killing his his enemies with drones. He was talking about college students, by the way. So I think people should be concerned about some of these figures.
So let me talk about some of the sort of the people involved.
Sure.
My impression of what the U.S. government said to Silicon Valley many years ago is, as long as you keep it, we will allow you to build these huge monopolies and be very wealthy and stars, as long as you preserve our leadership in all these technologies. And in fact, when we went from being the leader in many technologies to sort of being bested by China, one of the reasons was we allowed all these monopolies to grow and be fat and happy. So, I look at some of the folks in Silicon Valley and the defense contracting, and I say, and let's face it, a lot of these folks in the Silicon Valley are really defense contractors. I look at them and say, you're the guys who blew it. Why should I turn things over to you to build the new tools when you're the guys who blew the last model?
Right.
I mean, we're behind the 8 ball because they failed, and leaving us flat-footed. And the huge embarrassment to me, Maria, is if you look at how the United States looks on the global stage right now, we just look, the American brand is getting slaughtered every day. And part of it is we're not taking responsibility for our own mess. We're blaming the rest of the world. It's not the rest of the world's, problem. Or it's their problem that our leadership has failed, but it's our leadership that has failed.
I'm in Texas now, but I'm looking at what Australians feel about everything that they're seeing. And the sentiment really is, oh my gosh, we can't believe all of this corruption, all of this money stolen from taxpayers. And thank goodness for Doge for uncovering it. That's the general sentiment. There are very few people thinking critically. And the problem as well is that if you voice your critical thinking, you're actually penalized for that under the pseudo social credit system that's already in place with X. And so we are not able to have these kinds of conversations where we bounce around ideas. This is not even a brutal takedown of these guys. I could do that. I'm not.
Well, but let's do a brutal takedown. I'm happy to do a brutal takedown because, I can't tell you, during the whole presidential election, I and the Solari team got beat up. It got so bad the Solari team would say, can you just for 24 hours not tell the truth about Donald Trump? Well, because the last time Trump was in power, he instituted FASB 56. He did nothing about the 21 trillion, and he funded $18 billion behind a mass atrocity that's killed and disabled millions of Americans. But and with the state shut down 35% of the small businesses. What about that don't we understand?
Right. And everyone sort of gave him grace because there was this understanding that he made a mistake. He made a colossal mistake. Warp Speed specifically, he made a mistake, bringing in RFK Jr. now, and RFK Jr. is going to clean all this up. My problem is during his hearings, and of course this could have been, to help him get confirmed. He said how great Operation Warp Speed was. Day 2 of the administration, we have an announcement about AI mRNA, mRNA that has killed and maimed millions of people around the world. And so there seems to be this conflict with that idea that, he just made a mistake, he's going to clean it up.
No, so he announced a major initiative with mRNA technology, which is poisons.
Yes.
I mean,
it is.
He's proposing a major new round of poisoning for the American people. And that's a fact. Now, what will RFK do when he gets in? I'm very glad he put RFK in. And I have to tell you, that was a very brave thing to do. And in my book, he gets a big gold star for that. I mean, you have to give him credit where,
yes.
Right.
Yes.
Anyway, so
even, by the way, with the military bringing back all of those that were let go because of the COVID injections, because of the mandates, and they're bringing all of those healthy people back. Is that because we're planning a war, or is it just because it's the right thing to do? Time will tell.
So I think it's both, but and Trump was very good during the pandemic about saying, I refuse to mandate. And many people give him a get out of jail free card because he refused to mandate. Now, my feeling is if you put $18 billion behind poison and make it sound like it's credible, too many people end up dead. So anyway.
Well, the problem is shedding there as well, Catherine. I've spoken about this all the
Right.
time. You can talk about, choice all you want, but my choice is removed if this person's going to shed onto me. Just look at the ACAM 2000 monkeypox injection as an example, which says may cause death to the unvaccinated if you come into contact with them. That's not a choice for me.
Right.
It needs to be banned.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, and so the what he did with Stargate was dreadful. Okay, so let's talk about what they're doing now, which is unacceptable.
Okay, let's do it.
If you look at the law, so there is laws that say people coming into political office can't take bribes. Okay? There is laws saying government special employees like Musk and the Doge team it is illegal, it is a crime for them to be involved in things where they have conflicts of interest. So if they're doing things that impact their business, it's potentially a conflict of interest, which is a criminal statute. If information requires a top security clearance, you cannot access it without a top security clearance, let alone give access to anybody else who doesn't have clearance or isn't a government employee.
Which Musk says he has, but we're talking about 19 to 24-year-old kids, I think, that apparently have been given top secret clearances.
If you look at how long it takes to do a background check and clear somebody for a top security clearance, I don't believe any one of those Doge team has a top security clearance, or if they do, it was by a process which is, I would say, is nothing short of a divine miracle. I mean, I've been through 18 audits and investigations and an FBI background check and a Senate confirmation. So no, there's no way those folks have been through a top security clearance. Now, Musk could have a clearance for one of his other companies, but that wouldn't necessarily relate to Treasury data.
I see.
And there are credible reports that they not only had read-only access, but they had write access for some period of time.
Yes.
And the question is, if they had write access, what did they put in, including what did they put in that would give access to anybody from the intelligence agencies to private companies to... So if you look at the statutes that say no bribes, we've seen the president put out a meme coin right before he is inaugurated and he and his family get an extraordinary amount of money on the original offering, and that's secret. We don't know who gave that and what they got in exchange. So we created a private crypto system for essentially pay to play or kickbacks or something else. Now, Trump can say, well, Catherine, you have no proof. And you're right, I don't, because all the data is secret, right? I don't. But in the court of law, you're innocent until proven guilty. In the court of playing with other people's money as the president of the United States, you're guilty until proven innocent. You have to prove that that wasn't a kickback scheme. So I would call on Trump and his family to make clear who bought those coins, because when you buy a meme coin, you buy nothing,
Right.
right? It's just nothing. Okay, so that's an extraordinary amount of money. Okay, so there's that. Let's look at the privacy laws. If you're going to handle data at any government agency, but most particularly Treasury, you are going to have access to data, including access to all the competitors' data, for Musk's companies, right? But to access that data, you have to be trained in privacy laws. Now, if you look at the speed at which the Doge team came together, do I think that those young engineers have the proper training? And do I think Musk has the proper training? No. I mean, there's a reason the top civil servant at Treasury refused to give them access and resigned rather than give them access. That's exactly what I would have done. I would resign first. So do they have the time to have the proper training in privacy laws? No. Do they have access to competitors' data, either the companies they used to work for or Musk companies? Yes. And for a government special employee to have access to competitors' data, that's not legal.
Right.
You can't do that. So if you look at how it's been handled, now, why do I talk about all this? Because there is a way to go into the federal government and do everything they're doing and do it properly according to procedure and protocol. There is a way to do all of this legally if you care about the law. And you can do it quickly and you can do it well. If somebody says, oh, well, we're here to kick ass and take names and we need to go fast and whatever. No, I'm sorry. That's like saying you're a neurosurgeon, you're going in to do neurosurgery. You need to be fast and quick about it. Should you use a scalpel or a chainsaw? A chainsaw is faster.
Right.
Right? Okay. No, you use a chainsaw because you want to kill the patient. You use the chainsaw because you want to scare everybody. You use a chainsaw for shock and awe. And because you do want to do dirty things. I mean, one of the reasons you don't follow protocols is because you do want to give, Unit 8200 direct access to the Treasury payments. I mean, I'll be perfectly blunt. If you look at who I think stole the 21 trillion, Netanyahu and his syndicate was up to their eyeballs in that stuff. It was all part of the Epstein operation. So do I trust these guys? Not as far as I can throw them. I mean, if you look at Gaza, I think the reason they want to kill or kick out the Palestinians is they need all that land, not just for waterfront development. They need the oil and gas and the water and the land for their control grid. The control grid is energy rapacious and water rapacious, and that's a very dry area of the world. And as far as I know, the best aquifers are under the Palestinian land. So, so basically you've got the White House and that part of the syndicate basically saying, okay, we're just going to kill everybody and take the land. It was stunning. I don't know if you saw the White House announcement with Netanyahu, but they just admitted that they had killed 600 to 800,000 people.
I think the estimates were about 1.5 million people before, now a million now. So I thought it was around 500,000. Either way, so
it was
largely more than what they told us.
Well, I thought it was 2.1. One report that I got said it was 2.5. It's the Financial Times did a brilliant article many months ago where it showed how much of the infrastructure, they did very detailed GIS maps. And they showed you how much of the housing, how much of the hospitals, how much of the other physical infrastructure had been destroyed. And the reason you destroy the physical infrastructure like that is then famine will kill the rest. Famine and exposure. And that is, that is the sort of engineering of an intentional genocide.
That's
and
certainly, I'm in agreement with you, Catherine. This has been one of the most shocking things that I've seen announced, and it's just sort of, we're going to take this land we've helped Israel kill these people. We're going to take this land, and they don't really have a say. I've never seen anything like this in my life. We've never seen a genocide broadcast for all to see by Israel like we have over the past 2 years. I think ever in history. It's been
Okay, so let's talk about the
televised.
new tools of control.
Let's do it.
The old tools of control, like AID, are invisible or secret or soft. So you put people on the payroll in the country, you create all these NGOs and spread around a lot of money and, pick favorites and do all sorts of horrible things. So I'm not condoning it in any sense, but it's basically soft. You buy people, okay, or you trick them.
Right.
But it's either covert or it's just financial incentives, okay? Now what we're talking about, the reason I constantly say Gaza is a method, is now you're basically taking the surveillance tools that the Israelis developed in Gaza and in Palestine, and you're exporting them all around the world with drones. I mean, this is what the Palantir and the drone and Lavender operation
Yes.
is. You're putting everybody under the Starlink umbrella. Remember, what is Musk building in one of his companies? He's building the world's most invasive surveillance system through Starlink, right? Right. So Musk is a guy who's building a global surveillance system, and you're allowing him to hook up, whatever he wants in his AI into the government systems. So for all we know, we're hooking all the government data systems and flows up into the Starlink operation somehow, right? We don't know that we're not.
We don't know that we're not. All we have is verbal assurance. Where there is this illusion of transparency because of all the corruption that's been revealed, we're only seeing this much of the picture. And that is the problem that I have. And of course, just judging by the fact that anytime you raise concerns about this, it's generally shadow banned on X, which is the platform that this individual owns. Right. That shows me that they don't want people talking about these concerns.
Well,
Why?
First of all, they fired the person at the White House who does the ethics, conflicts of interest. Okay. So you fired them. Then you fired all the IGs with a few exceptions. Where somebody said it's like firing all the sheriffs before you bring the thieves in. And then you go down the list and you fired a whole bunch of the people who in Washington whose job is to make sure that protocols are followed, right? So you're stripping out anybody who might object to you doing something that is illegal. Right. And
again, I see the other argument, which is all these people were corrupt. This is the reason why the country's been in such bad shape all this time. I'm trying to see both sides of the argument here.
So here's the thing, Maria. Let me give you both sides of the argument. They can do neurosurgery with a scalpel. These guys are smart. If they don't have the resources, they can get them quickly.
Yes.
They can go very fast. They can do all of this. And they can not only, if I cancel a contract with an NGO that I think is corrupt, I have the power under the law to cancel it, at the pleasure of the government. I can do that as long as I give them the proper notification and go through the different steps. If I don't do that, if I do it with a chainsaw, then they can go to court. They're going to win in court. They're going to make me pay. I'm going to have to waste money on the court. The Department of Justice is going to have to handle the lawsuit. I'm going to lose, and then I'm not only going to have to pay them, I'm going to have to pay their legal fees and all sorts of other stuff, right? So doing this chaotically is not saving any money and it's not ending corruption. You're just, if I can cancel a contract, great. But why cancel it in a way that costs me a lot more time and money than you're just wasting taxpayers' resources, right? So that argument, I'm sorry, just doesn't hold weight. Now, here's the thing. Are you canceling a lot of things that you and I would love to see canceled? Absolutely. But what are you replacing it with? And if
That's
what
the
you're
key.
replacing with is absolutely worse, and what we've seen just from what they've published, what they're rolling out is so much worse and so much more frightening than anything we had. Now, part of the problem is if you look at who's screaming, it's people who were on the payroll of all the old stuff.
Right.
And some of it was good and some of it was corrupt. But frankly, I feel absolutely no sympathy for them because they sat by while the government got more and more lawless and did nothing. Now,
Correct.
let me tell you what you need to say to people. The solution to the government disobeying the Constitution and being corrupt is for the government to stop being corrupt and to start obeying the Constitution. Okay? That's the solution. The response to lawlessness is more and worse lawlessness. That's not a solution. What we're doing is we're promoting Bolshevik. This is Bolshevik, right? So here's what you need to understand. If I can kill the people of Gaza and take their oil and gas and their water and their land, it's only a matter of time, once I finish doing that I do the same to you. And if we let this group of people and encourage them to be lawless, the lawlessness will not stop with canceling woke policies. The lawlessness will then go for the essentially stripping the last remaining assets that can be stolen. So let me just close on one note, because I come back to, it's easy to sit in the peanut gallery and criticize a group going into the administration on what they're doing. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what would I do if I were in their shoes? How does that compare to what they're doing? And the one thing I will say is the United States is facing a reckoning. But the United States has gone along with massive corruption until now because everybody got their check. And we are all, the time has come to look in the mirror and face the fact that we have all lived high in the horse on this system, and this system has been, increasingly lawless for decades.